Okay, so we're going to do an experiment. Now, I want to test a theory that I have. Let me explain. So, when people first start building their own studio, there seems to be a common approach to buying microphones. I was exactly the same when quite a long time ago now, I started building my own studio. And the approach is this. People think, well, I'm going to need a reasonable mid-range, reasonable quality condenser for vocals, acoustic guitar, stuff like that. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Then people think I'm also going to need a reasonable quality, good all-round dynamic microphone, a utility mic, something like an SM57, good for electric guitars, percussion, and yeah, you're absolutely right. And two microphones like that will cover a lot of ground. But then people think, how am I going to record drums? I've only got these two mics. I've spent most of my budget on, getting a reasonable quality dynamic and a reasonable quality condenser. I've not got much budget left, so I'm going to have to buy a cheap drum microphone kit. Now, I did exactly that when I was first building my studio. I had a AKG solid tube condenser microphone, served me well for quite a few years. I had a SM57, great microphone, still got it today. And I bought a cheap drum microphone kit. But now, with the experience that I have, what I've learnt over the years, if I could go back to my former self and make a recommendation, I would say do not buy a cheap drum microphone kit. Instead, you're better off buying a kick drum mic, and if you can stretch it, maybe buy a second condenser. But if not, I think you're better off buying 3 good quality mics and recording drums with just 3 mics than you are stretching your budget to a whole microphone set of 6 or 7 or 8, depending how big your drum kit is or how many mics you've got in your kit. So we're going to test that. We are going to test 3 good quality microphones, well respected in the industry, good quality microphones. We're going to compare how that sounds compared with buying, well, I only use 2 toms, so we're going to use 6 cheaper microphones, and we're going to see which one sounds best and test my theory. So just quickly, before we meet the microphones and get on with the experiment, I just wanted to dispel a bit of a myth that I think is quite common amongst people first getting into recording drums, and that is that you need loads of microphones. You need to close mic everything to get a good drum sound. Simply not true. I mean, if we rewind back in time, a lot of the early Beatles recordings just had 2 microphones. I mean, look at the pictures of Ringo Starr in Abbey Road, and he's got a Coles 4038 ribbon microphone on overhead, and I think it's an AKG D12 on the kick. Fast forward a little bit on into the 70s, Led Zeppelin, and the John Glenn's technique uses 4 microphones: kick, snare, 1 overhead above the snare, 1 overhead to the side, slightly panned. You've got a great sounding drum kit with a nice stereo image from just 4 mics. So this idea you need loads of mics to make a drum kit sound good is simply not true. In fact, the more microphones you have, the more potential problems you're going to face. You're introducing more leakage. You're introducing more potential phase issues of things arriving at different time and cancelling out and adding together. So yeah, it's just simply not true. So it's time to choose the microphones. These are my mic drawers here. And a few others dotted around the room. So contenders for snare. I mean, my go-tos on snare are usually an M201 or a 57. 57's a bit brighter, 201 a bit fuller, a bit more punch. SM58 is brilliant on snare. You know, a lot of people, I think they just see that as a vocal mic. No, you can use it on electric guitars. I've used it on electric guitar amps quite a lot, and it sounds really good. It sounds great on snare. In the same way, 57 sounds great on vocals. 58 also sounds great on snare. So don't rule it out. And electrics, don't rule it out. But we're going to go 57 because that is, it's cheaper than the Bear Dynamics. So budget-wise, it's a winner. And it is kind of the industry standard go-to utility mic. So it seems a bit silly not to choose a 57 for that. Contenders for kick, Beta 52 by Shure. Up here I've got a D112, the egg. Let's put that there. I think you can see that on the camera just about. RE20, really good, but it's very expensive. I mean, I think they're over 400 odd quid now. So I'm going to rule that one out, just on price. It's a shame. It's a good mic, very versatile, good on vocals, electrics, yeah, but too expensive. I'm also going to rule out the ME88 because I think they're about, I don't keep up with current prices, but I think they're about 280 odd quid. So again, we're going to be blowing the budget if we buy them. These are also great on kick as well. This is the Audio Technica ATM25, but I'm not going to consider them because they're quite rare and yeah, quite expensive. I'm actually going to go for the D112, I think. Not because it's my favourite kick mic. Some people love them, get great results. I've never been blown away by it myself, but you know, a lot of that's just personal preference. But the reason I'm going to choose this over the Beta 52, this is a lot more versatile than the Beta 52. I personally, I'm not saying, you know, some of you may have had great results, but I've never put the Beta 52 in front of something like a guitar cab or a bass cab, listened back and thought, yeah, that's the mic for the job. For me, it's a bit of a one-trick pony. It's a great mic for what it does. Probably 70-80% of the drums I track end up with a Beta 52 on. I really love it for kick, but it is, as I say, a bit of a one-trick pony. But this, you know, it does sound really good on guitar cabs. That's probably the only other thing I'd use it for. But that's useful if you're limiting yourself to 3 mics, and you've got maybe the 57, where did I put it? 57. Maybe you can track your main guitar parts with a 57 and do an overdub with the D112 just to sit it somewhere slightly different in the mix. So versatility is going to score it for the egg. Condenser wise, I'm going to have to break the rules a little bit here because I mean, we could go small diaphragm, like, and actually, you know, a lot of people think have to get large diaphragm for vocals. Not true at all. Not true. Never rule out small diaphragms for vocals just because maybe they're used a bit less. But I am going to rule out small diaphragms for this because I think in most cases people, you know, you might already have a large diaphragm microphone, in which case, yeah, let's stick with that for now. Stick with that. However, I don't have any sort of 500, like 300-500 pound large diaphragms, so I'm going to use 414. I know it's sort of way over budget, but I think it will represent most large diaphragms and what large diaphragms do pretty well. And in the absence of a cheaper one, I'm going to have to use this one. So yeah, I'm bending the rules a little bit. Okay, and over here we have the contenders for the cheap mics. These are Red 5 Audio. I've borrowed these. Had a look online. I don't know if they're still made actually, but I think they're about £200 when they were first on the market. Obviously got a dynamic for the kick there, some dynamics for your snare tom-tom, and then 2 overheads there, which we'll set up in XY as we said. Right, let's get these set up. I am sat at my drum kit and I'll just show you how the mics are set up, where the mics are, what the mics are. Yeah, a little tour. As you can see in XY configuration, the cheap condensers doing their thing, and 414 there in cardioid representing the expensive microphones. Snare, we've got the 2 there, SM57 and the cheap one. Toms, cheap one. And then on kick, I've used a ported resonant head, the hole in so we can see the front head, because that'll help give us an idea of you know, the attack that these mics pick up. So both mics can see the front head as well as obviously this resonant head. We've got the egg on the left and the other one on the right. Okay, so we've recorded the drums, I've loaded the session into Pro Tools, so now it's just time to compare the results. So first of all, I'm going to A/B test each mic with its equivalent, cheap and expensive. So let's start with the kick. So this is the cheap kick, so let's have a listen. Now let's listen to the D112, the more expensive one. Immediately I can hear a lot more low end in the D112. The cheap one sounds a bit tubby to me. Let's just have a listen again. Cheap one. It's a bit woolly. There's a lot of woof woof sort of sound. Back to the D112. Some nice depth there as well. Snare. So this is the cheap snare mic. And then the SM57. Okay, immediately the SM57 has a lot more depth, body. It's a lot fuller. The cheap one sounded brittle to me. Also, the leakage was really noticeable in that. Listen to the... let's go to this bit with the hi-hats. I think this will be quite obvious. Just listen, not to the snare. Try and ignore the snare and focus in on the hi-hats. Okay, now listen to the hi-hats on this. To me, they sound a lot more natural, less trashy on the SM57. So, yeah. And last of all, let's do the condensers. So let's listen to the cheap overheads in mono. And the 414. And the cheap 414. Okay, the two things jump out at me here. The 414 has a lot more body to it, which is good. You've got to, when we're recording drums are one instrument, not lots of instruments put together. I think people often go wrong with that kind of approach. And the overheads capture the whole instrument, which is one reason why they're really important. So if your overheads are capturing the whole of the drum kit and it's sounding good, that's really going to help in getting a good drum sound. So the 414... shouldn't talk over it when I play, but the 414 is capturing a lot more of the low mids than the cheap ones. So it is doing a much better job of capturing the whole kit. The other thing that jumps out of me, now I've recorded drums a lot in this room, and when I listen on the cheap mics, the room doesn't sound very good. Now I've recorded loads of drums in here and they've always sounded good. It's a good sounding room. It's not too lively, but it's not too dead. It's big enough to let, you know, good balanced frequency response. But if I listen in this, it almost sounds quite echoey. Now, I can only speculate as to why that is. Let's just listen to the 414 again. A lot less echoey, a lot more focused. Now, maybe the polar patterns on the cheap mics aren't as advertised. Maybe they're not as cardioid as they're meant to be. Maybe there's particular resonances in the capsule that are similar to the room and they're not working well together. I don't know, but the 414, you know, you listen to the 414 and you think that's a good sounding drum room. You listen on the cheap ones, you think that's not a very good sounding drum room. Yeah, which I wasn't expecting that, but that's interesting. Right, okay, so we've A-B'd the mics, and I think it's fair to say, maybe you disagree, but certainly in my opinion, the pro mics, the expensive mics, won all of those. They sounded better. So now we're going to A-B test the 3 expensive mics and the 3 cheap mics before we start bringing in the other close mics on the toms. Anyway, enough talking, let's listen to the cheap mics. Expensive. Okay, they obviously need work with EQ in both cases. I mean, to be honest, if I was actually recording these with that 57, I'd probably pull it a little bit further away just to reduce the proximity effect. With the cheap mic, I'd do exactly the opposite. To be honest, I'd probably get it. Sounds like it needs to be about an inch away to get the low end that you'd need. But yeah, again, to me, the Pro ones win that test. So yeah, right. Let's do the last test. Let's give me 10 minutes, and I'm gonna very quickly mix these two, and then we'll compare again. So here we go. Ta-da! So let's start with the cheap mics. Let's just pick somewhere. Here we go. And then let's go to the expensive mics. Okay, so what do you think? I know what I think. Yeah, which to you sounded better, the cheap mics or the expensive mics? Now, to me, to my ears, the expensive mics won in every department, except obviously we didn't have that, the toms weren't cutting through. Now, I know for a fact that by moving the overhead mic into a different position, I can get a lot more toms because I've done it. If I put it back over, probably over the drummer's head, a foot above, looking, kind of getting a drummer's perspective of the kit, I know there I would get a lot more toms present in the mix. I also, out the front of the kit, so rather than an overhead, more of a kind of mono kit mic, about a foot above the kick, maybe 3 feet back, around there, will also get me a lot more toms than I had. So I know that can be improved because I've done it. But that said, I still won't get the in-your-face, tom sounds. If that's what you're after, you're not going to get that with just using 3 or 4 mics. However, other than that, the kick was a deal breaker for me. There was just nowhere near enough low end in the cheap kick. I mean, it just wasn't there. I was trying to EQ it in and it just sounded bad. It just wasn't there to start with. I didn't have the frequencies I needed, and it was really woofy in the low mids. Not a pleasant. That is a deal breaker compared to the Egg, and the Egg is not even my favorite kick drum mic. It's a good one, but it's not my favorite one. But that, even then, like, it sounded so much better. So that is a bit of a deal breaker because I don't know what I'd do without that low end thump. I'd have to drum replace everything. Again, snare. EQing the expensive mics was a lot easier. I found I had everything, right from the word go, I had everything there that I wanted. I wasn't trying to correct as much. There was a little bit of ring on the snare, I was just reining in, but not much. So most of the EQ decisions were broad sweeps of, do I want it brighter, do I want it darker? It wasn't, that sounds better, that sounds, it was just what I wanted to sit right, in that particular mix. Was with the EQ with the cheaper mics, there was a lot more of, oh, that doesn't sound good, I need to correct that. Oh, that doesn't sound good, I need to correct that. Oh, that doesn't sound good, I need to correct that. The stereo image, I didn't really miss anything, to be honest. Once I'd added the quasi room mics, there's a really strong, powerful kick and snare down the middle, and the room mics, the fake room mics did their thing. It felt great. So yeah, I'd say the only thing that the expensive mics missed was the toms. But here's what I do: if toms are a deal breaker for you, then and you can't find you're getting the best results from just moving the overhead, then I still wouldn't buy a cheap drum kit mic. What I'd do is, going back to our budget, we buy a large diaphragm condenser. That's a given because we need that for vocals and other things, etc. We're buying something like a 57, a utility dynamic microphone. So they're a given. And if we're going to say, well, we've got £200 left in our budget because that's what the cheap drum mics cost. So of that £200, let's say we buy a second-hand D112 or a second-hand Beta 52, something like that, 80, 90 quid. That still leaves us with, 100, 110, 120 quid to spend on some cheap mics for toms. So if you've got two toms, you could buy a pair of 50, cheap £50 dynamic mics to do the tom thing, and for still have a bit of money left over as well. So that way you're still going to get the low end, the good quality kick. You're still going to get the good quality snare, the good quality overheads. You can still do the quasi room mic thing that I did there with the kind of impulse response, and you still get the toms. And then you can just upgrade the two mics as and when. So yeah, that's what I do. So my conclusion is don't buy a cheap drum mic kit. Don't make the mistake I made. Don't make the mistake, maybe it's not a mistake, this is my opinion, but the mistake others often make. And I think you'll be a bit wiser putting your money into just a good kick mic and maybe a couple of cheap ones for toms.